have to ask about Kyle Dubas, though. The Pittsburgh Penguins were back in Toronto. Kyle Dubas specifically, back in Toronto a couple of days ago. That game went down. It went bad for the Penguins. But I would love to know your thoughts and analysis on how that all went down.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be any number of bad games that every team plays in a season, but you really probably don't want one in that case if you're Kyle Dubas coming back to Scotiabank Arena for the first time as a visiting general manager / team president in Pittsburgh. I mean, a 7-0 loss pretty much speaks for itself. The Leafs also hit, I think, 4 or 5 posts in the game. Like, it is the rare 7-0 game that honestly the score could have been worse, I think. Pittsburgh just was very leaky defensively, gave up a lot of odd man rushes and chances to the Leafs. And, Toronto was playing without Austin Matthews for that game and still had no trouble generating some great offensive chances. So you could see it. I was in the arena, actually in the press box, but obviously I was aware of the broadcast, and they kept panning to Kyle's booth, him and Jason Spezza there. Must not have been a great night for them. Few fans tried to sort of derisively chant Dubas. I don't think it never reached a big enough pitch to be all that notable, but there were a few people out there that recognized he was in the building. And I mean, I think Pittsburgh's an interesting team for me. I mean, they really, as we're talking now, we're almost at the Christmas break here. They're not in a playoff spot. They've had some injuries like a lot of teams, but you'd wonder where that push is going to come from. I don't have a terrible amount of confidence in the Eastern Conference right now. There's a lot of teams kind of hanging in that no man's land zone. And so, maybe that by virtue of that might keep a lot of those teams in the playoff race right into March and April. But, it feels like a kind of a crucial moment in time for Pittsburgh. And that was not a very good game for them on Saturday.
Right now, they're 5 points out of the last wildcard spot in the East. They do have a .500 record, but this is well below expectations for this team. The power play, we've hyped them up from preseason, but they are among the bottom third in the league in that regard. What does Kyle Dubas do with this roster going forward?
He gave a press conference, I believe it was last week in Pittsburgh, and there's sort of a cryptic line as part of that press conference about sort of like waiting till the All-Star break to sort of make any decisions. And I think, my understanding of where they're at is, Kyle Dubas has come into this team over the summer. Obviously a legacy team with some legacy players. You have Chris Letang, Evgeny Malkin, and Sidney Crosby have been teammates more than any other teammates in North American professional sports for the amount of time they've spent as teammates. And I think that the general manager wants to give his team a window here to dig out of it, to get back into a playoff position, to maybe show him that he should be looking to add at the deadline. But, I built into the unspoken part, I would say, of that line in Kyle's press conference last week is that if that doesn't happen, I think he's really going to have a decision to make when it comes to sort of retooling. And I don't see Pittsburgh as being eventually. We know a rebuild is coming. Like, that's no mystery. That's been on the horizon for some time. But I don't see it being the kind of rebuild where they take everything down to the wood. Like, in San Jose, they're kind of in the middle of a rebuilding process. They've traded away some really good players, some legacy players, Brent Burns, Carlson, and the like. I don't think Pittsburgh's going to go that route. I really believe they're going to kind of move everything around the chairs as much as they can. But I would be surprised if we're talking about Crosby, Malkin, or Letang being part of those moves. And so I think, you might look at some retooling there. They got an intriguing decision with Jake Gensel, who's been a really valuable goal scorer for them, has put up good points and all that this season. But he's a pending UFA. He's 30 years old, kind of in that middle zone where if you're a team like Pittsburgh and maybe a rebuild's on the horizon, maybe he's best traded at the deadline. And so I think Pittsburgh will be a team that we really keep close eyes on as we get closer to March 8th, just in terms of where they're at in the standings, what that means for management. And, I think Kyle Dubas, it's probably easier in some ways being new to the organization to make some of those hard decisions. It's not time to decide anything just yet, but look, man, it's already, I can't believe it's already almost the holiday break. It won't be long before it's the end of January. And if they're still 5 or 6 or 7 or more points out of a playoff spot, I think they're going to have to look at pieces they can sell. As I say, no headlines here. I don't think that it'll be any of the main pieces that were part of those 3 Stanley Cup teams.
Which makes sense in one regard because they're still at a high level, but could you imagine, just put yourself in Kyle Dubas' shoes for a second. Could you imagine being the guy that has to consider even trading Crosby or Letang or Malkin? I know you're saying that's not going to happen. It doesn't look like it will, but could you imagine being in those shoes?
I can't really, and I should be clear. I'm not saying it's not 100% going to happen. I just don't think it's likely to happen. It doesn't seem like that's the way the wind's blowing. But, sometimes things change too, right? I mean, a lot of it is about what those players want. I mean, certainly in the case of Malkin and Letang, they've got, contracts that stretch into the future here. Do they still want to play out those contracts, even if they're in a spot where maybe they start to feel the Penguins can't win a cup before they're likely to retire? Crosby is only 1 year out. He's got one more season beyond this one on the 12-year deal he signed, obviously 11 years ago. But it will be up to him. Does he want to sign a new deal? Everything I've heard is that he wants to be a career Penguin. But again, let's see how the season goes. I mean, those players have been on so many great teams, even the ones that didn't win a Stanley Cup. They've been used to being in the hunt every year. If it turns into the type of year where they're losing games, maybe not 7-0, but if it's one-sided and they're not really that competitive, I mean, look, it's a tough one. I don't think there's any nice way around this. Look at the players in this generation. I'm just going off the top of my head. Like, you had Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane had long-term deals in Chicago. Obviously enjoyed lots of success there, but their last 5 or 6 seasons, I mean, Chicago was a non-factor when it came to having a chance to win a Stanley Cup. I mean, they barely made the playoffs. And obviously part of what's fueling Patrick Kane's comeback is he wants to be part of those kind of teams again. I mean, it's hard to say where these guys will be at after another, say, year of potentially not moving forward as an organization. But, I think for Kyle Dubas' standpoint, he just doesn't have any prospects really, right? I mean, they have Yager, who's going to the World Juniors for Team Canada.
Brayden Yager, yes.
But really, they don't have a lot of prospects in the pipeline. They've already traded away a future first-round pick as part of that Carlson deal. I think they don't even own all their seconds coming up. I mean, I think it's going to be his job at some point in time to start recouping future assets and stockpiling and doing it that way. I think that they're going to have flexibility on the cap. One way they might look to get better is going out and signing players in free agency or making trades for impactful players that are maybe, say, 25, 26, 27, and trying to keep it going that way. I think there's lots of ways to approach a rebuild. It's not always just trade away absolutely anything with value and start fresh. I think that there's different sort of modes of it, and I think that the Penguins will probably eventually get to a more modified version of that kind of thing. But certainly the more 7-0 games you see, that conversation I think is going to get pick up some speed here a little bit, because Crosby's played out of his mind this year. Honestly, if you look at it, as I said, Gensel's had a pretty strong start to the year, but there's just defensively, I mean, that team gives up a lot, and especially the last 10 or 12 games here, they've really sprung a leak there, and you just wonder if the roster has enough to get through it and truly challenge for a playoff spot.
We're going to have to keep an eye out for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and if they continue to have performances like what they did against Toronto, I think we're going to see some Penguins on your next trade board.
Well, the trade board comes out on Wednesday. Little tease. It's not, we're recording this on Monday morning, so it's not 100% finalized, but obviously I've put a lot of work in, and I believe as of right now, there's one Penguin on there.
Okay.
But there's lots of room for more. I mean, look at the fun part about the trade board, I'll say this, is when you get into January and February and get much closer to the deadline, like some teams we might not have expected to be sellers become sellers. And then all of a sudden that brings into play a whole new group of players or a fresh batch of players. So I think Pittsburgh could be one. I think Seattle's a team I'm watching, they lost 8 in a row here recently, and they got a number of pending UFAs on their team, including Jordan Eberle, Alex Wenberg, a few others, Justin Schultz. So, I think that the trade season is just kind of heating up a little bit, not quite getting to full boil. I think that there could be some interesting names that come into play once we get into the new year here.